Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on Doordarshan, India's national broadcaster, about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations, and India's engagement with a variety of initiatives around the world to provide global public goods. Viewers, in this episode, we are taking up the theme of 9 years of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's governance with a special emphasis on foreign policy. From 2014 to 2023, there have been enormous transformations in India and India's role in the world. This is what we're going to be discussing, and to take us through this journey, I have a very special guest, deep honor for us to be hosting none other than Dr. Subrahmanyam Jaishankar.
Great pleasure.
Dr. Jaishankar is India's External Affairs Minister, as you know, and also a seasoned diplomat who has spent more than 4 decades in the Foreign Service. He was India's ambassador to China, India's ambassador to the United States, and a foreign secretary, which is the highest position within the foreign policy system of India. And now the spearhead of Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy. So it's really an honor, sir, to have you here.
Thank you. It's a great privilege for me too, particularly on this occasion.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Jaishankar, 9 years, you have remarked recently that it's not just 9 years, but if you go back to your own career, you joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1977.
Right.
And in the last 45 years, you have seen so many prime ministers, but you said that the kind of reception that we are getting internationally, the kind of adoration, admiration for India and support for India, you know, is unprecedented. You've never seen this. So I'd like you to start by talking about why this is so, and clearly this is linked to this prime minister and Modi ji's impact on our diplomacy, on our foreign policy, on our global image and prestige. And why do you think it has risen so high under him as opposed to all his predecessors?
Well, look, let me put it to you this way. I think definitely there's the leadership aspect. I think there's a policy aspect, and I think there's a structural aspect. So let me explain that. One, in the last 9 years, India has changed. So when people think of India and think of Prime Minister Modi, they actually, the world factors in those changes. You know, those could be digital changes, there could be our health response changes, there could be our economic transformation, what is happening in the infrastructure. So there is that, you know, the changing India, for which much of the world sees that as quite rightly linked to Prime Minister Modi's policies. The second is actually changing world, that this is a very turbulent world, it's very uncertain, it's very volatile. As it is, there were these big shifts which were taking place. Then you had the COVID, which was a once in a century event. Then you have the Ukraine conflict. So you have a changing India, you have a changing world, and you have a Prime Minister who's in a way able to lead one and navigate the other. And that is something the world takes note of. And the fact that he himself, you know, he is so full of ideas, initiatives, the enthusiasm for engaging the world is so manifest. I think that is recognized by the world. So the world reciprocates that. So people respect him for his ideas, they recognize his delivery, but most of all they welcome this India under him, you know, which is participative, contributory, you know, a first responder, a vaccine Maitri provider, engaged in climate change, in countering terrorism. So I think it's a combination of all of that.
And you've spoken about how he has shaped global discourse and institutions also. And we see that when, let's say, world leaders say that they have taken on board his phrase, for example, that this is not the era of war, for example, or even yours, your formulation that Europe's problems should not be Europe should also think about the whole world and not just about its own problems. Those sorts of things are catching on and suggest that even at the level of norms and discourse, India is being seen as a rule maker rather than a rule taker or a receiver. And I think that's a big shift, isn't it, in this era? And we have to attribute it to the PM and the way he has engaged with world leaders, his personal chemistry with top peers and counterparts around the world. We have never seen this, sir, in the history of Indian diplomacy.
Look, it isn't just rule maker, rule taker. There is that. I think it's also ideas provider, solution finder. So you have, for example, at COP21, Prime Minister came up with the idea of an international solar alliance. Okay. So now 8 years have passed, 100 countries are members.
It's a reality.
Okay. He then came up a year and a half later with the idea of a coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure. Now he's come up with the LIFE initiative with the idea of digital for development. I must tell you that when we think of 9 years and the changes in India, let me tell you all the changes in India which you and I are and the public in India is seeing, the world is also seeing. And a large part of the world today, people just don't talk to me about foreign policy when I go out. They are actually very interested what's happening in the world. They are extremely interested, especially for example at the digital delivery of public goods that we have made in this country. So we are actually in a way setting an example, sometimes even without knowing it.
And as Mahatma Gandhi used to say, be the change you want to see in the world. India domestic governance reforms clearly are being appreciated internationally and are even being exported, because many of our, like our UPI payment system and all these are now widely known. Ashwini Vaishnav, our IT minister, was saying that a number of G20 countries actually want India made 5G technology, and these are all, I think, shining examples of Modi's India actually being seen as worth emulating for others, instead of us following the role, the path set by more advanced countries.
If I were to pick 3 things in India in the last 9 years, which in my view has reshaped the world's thinking about India, one I would say is called the vaccine experience. Not just the production of vaccines, not just the on-scale vaccination we did, which also, by the way, people regard as very remarkable, but that we were willing to share. So I cannot overstate to you the goodwill of Vaccine Maitri, but respect for the whole vaccination process. The second I would say is digital. A lot of interest in digital, in every sense. Digital in the way in which we are today giving benefits, social benefits, economic benefits, schemes which schemes which would be done in a few lakhs today are being done in tens of crores. People see that. I've actually had other leaders, even presidents of countries, who actually told me, I have the same problem. And in fact, many of them said, for us also we have a problem of leakage. And we see how, if you look, they see it as a good governance tool other than a delivery tool. So I think that's true. And the third is when it comes to climate action. Today we are seen as a climate leader, that we are the provider of ideas and initiatives. We are the people who are doing it on scale. We are the people who are standing up for climate justice, the rights of those who are profoundly affected but who do not have that. So it's a combination of all that. So I would say, when you speak about the Prime Minister, yes, one part of the Prime Minister's image is a leader who's kind of delivered and created capabilities, but the other part of it is also a person who has shared and who articulates the sentiments on behalf of a large part of the world. So there are many countries, and I was with him recently in the Pacific Islands in Papua New Guinea.
Yeah.
Look, the kind of instinctive gesture of respect we saw on the TV screen, it is because somewhere inside people feel, this man speaks for us.
It's totally spontaneous and heartfelt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dr. Jaishankar, moving on from our image and stature, which undoubtedly have risen to probably the highest stage since independence, the other transformation which I have written about and many other scholars have noted is with our strategic culture and with our self-confidence on the world stage to hold our ground. And you have been a great votary for that, and you are actually our voice on the world stage when it comes to representing PM's vision of a strong and steadfast India. Now on this you have also even spoken about how our Indian Foreign Service officers today are far more confident and willing to punch back. I've written about the counter punch diplomacy that you represent.
Well,
So where does this come from, Dr. Jaishankar? I mean, people admire it a lot, and it's really seen as a sign of India arriving and no longer willing to play second fiddle to anybody. But where does this confidence of Modi Sarkar come from? And what do you think is the wellspring of this? You're also a member of the Bharatiya Janata Party. You're a member of Parliament. I'm sure the cultural nationalism of BJP is also very much a big factor here. But what else? I mean, in your view, where is this coming from? The wellsprings of this self-confident India, which is now on this quest for becoming a leading power, as you say.
I think multiple sources. No question, it is coming from having a more confident and self-assured leader who partly through his own actions and behavior and demeanor, he inspires other people. It also comes from the fact that working with him you get very clear-cut decisions or approaches, and a sense that look, he backs you up. You're part of a team. You know what you are supposed to, what is expected of you. You know you will be backed all the way. So I think in that sense, so the one part of it I'd say is a set of leadership
Qualities.
attributes.
Yeah.
The second is actually the change in the country, the political changes in the country. Okay. And if you look, in a way you could say this is a tribute to our deepening democracy. That the India of today, I often use this phrase saying an India that is more Bharat. To me it kind of captures the change in many ways. This is a India which is much truer to its traditions, its heritage, its roots.
More authentic, as you've said.
It's more confident. It is not trying to be imitative. It notes the differences. It doesn't disparage it, but it doesn't feel the pressure. It has the confidence not to conform because the dominant sort of thought processes of the last 2 centuries are pushing you in that direction. So I mean, to me, you kind of put a political definition to it. I would say it's something broader than that. I think it isn't just it's a BJP government. I think the country itself has shifted towards a much greater sense of belief in ourselves, in our history, in our tradition, in our culture, in our values. All of that is expressed. The third is, in a way, I would say the mood of the country, especially of the younger generations. That
they're very nationalistic.
yes, the younger
and
generations.
They expect the state to be.
No, and they are also they're problem solving by nature. They kind of their attitude, and I see this frankly even within the Ministry of External Affairs and the Foreign Service. That today when I look at somebody, I look at my diplomats in all the difficult positions, and just now we went through a very, very challenging experience in Sudan. But my ambassador, our staff out there, I mean those guys stayed. They went through stuff which we still haven't made much of it public. But you actually had people, there was shooting going on. There were people who lost lives in all of that. They were operating under enormous personal risk, and sometimes people at this end don't understand that. For them,
they just want results.
No, they sometimes even use it for point scoring. But my point is, forget that. To me, I have a system today which is much more motivated. In fact, I tell people, look, it's the same foreign service which I have seen for 45 years. But the level of commitment, the level of volunteerism in a way is much more.
Inspired a lot. That
People
makes a huge difference.
are willing to do much more. Because again remember, they also have a feeling they are being backed up. You know, I mean, it's something which goes down the system.
Absolutely.
When you actually say, look, go out there, get the mission done, we are all with you.
Amazing. Prime Minister has often spoken about the whole of government approach to foreign policy also, and the way different ministries and internally also the amount of coordination that we have seen, and bringing in defense closer to external affairs, and merging them, commerce, all these. I mean, we have never seen this level of integration. It's a kind of a state reorganization to make it much more efficient and performing, I suppose, and that's a big reform.
Absolutely. I think if I were to take the big clusters in which we operate today, I would say between finance, commerce and MEA, and whichever could be IT ministry or depending on the issue, that would be a kind of an economic grouping which operates very closely. Similarly in defense, or not defense, in security.
Yeah.
So you would have MEA, you would have defense, you would have the services, you would have the national security secretary, that's another cluster. So you have one of the changes I have seen within the government is, whether it's at a ministerial level or it goes down to secretary or low down, that kind of culture of, you can kind of say, small groups to address a situation or a problem. That small group culture, coordinated culture to
like
deal,
a task force type thing.
Yes, that's one of the kind of a hallmark, you can say, of the Modi government over the last 9 years.
Dr. Jaishankar, defense, talking of defense, this has been a strong point of this government. There's no doubt about the way we have handled national security threats. You have kindly endorsed my book, Crunch Time, on this matter as well. The fact is that our adversaries, we have of course built a lot of strategic partnerships, and I'll come to that. But when we come to our adversaries, the signaling, our posturing, and even our negotiations are showing a different face of India that is far more courageous and bolder, and one that is, you have mentioned that an ambitious foreign policy requires risk taking, and Prime Minister Modi has shown the willingness to take risks to deter our adversaries. So on that front, we can see there has been some kind of a elevation of India's strategic culture. It is no longer seen as a soft state. You have mentioned yourself in your book, India Way. There was a time before 2014 that we were like the laughing stock of the world, and often been seen as a soft state that cannot do anything to our adversaries while they keep harming us. But now it's not just the retaliation, but the kind of pressure, countervailing measures that we have taken. All these have really shown a far more muscular, assertive India to our adversaries. Your comments on this and how this transformation has come. Obviously PM is authorizing all of you to go for it, but what else is happening in the system that's making this happen?
We are today the most populous country. We are the 5th largest economy. It's not just quantitative. We are developing the mentality of being on the big stage. That's a mindset. Which has changed. Now, what does that really mean? It means that when you have national security challenges, first of all, you face up to them. You don't duck them, you don't hide them, you don't, you act on them. Okay. So if, for example, as we saw, there was cross-border terror attacks, then you respond to them. You don't let it be the way Mumbai and 26/11 was handled. Or you could say, what we saw on the northern borders, where the Chinese were seeking to change the status quo in the border areas in 2020. The fact that we are willing to send forces up there and to contest that and to stay there for as long as it takes. Now, it's not again just a policy, and it cannot be only when you are presented with a crisis. You have to do the changes and prepare for it 365 days a year for every year if in a crisis time you must move.
Yeah.
So, that is one of the reasons, for example, we are now investing so much effort in infrastructure development in the border areas, because you know how badly that was neglected in the past.
Right.
So, and then similarly, when it comes to cross border attacks, one part of it is to respond to it, but one part of it is also to delegitimize it. The world must not see it as something, with these two guys do that, because then you are allowing the other guy to get away with
equivalence, a false
it's
moral
a
equivalence.
Not only a false equivalence, it's also a kind of, let's put up with it, it's just the way these people do it. So, it can be politics, it can be the diplomatic pushback, it can be the kind of operational decisions which Prime Minister took in 2020, but it also has to be systemic preparation.
Yeah.
So, the attention today, if you look at it, our infrastructure, the border area infrastructure budget is gone up 3 times in these 9 years. Okay. If you look at the road building, that the bridge building, the tunneling, I mean, you are going 2x, you are 2x, 3x what it used to be in the past. Now, this is very, very necessary.
Undeterred by the external adversary that wants us to back away from doing these things.
Yes, absolutely. And now we are talking in a very sort of direct way about security, but sometimes the security can be much broader. I mean, it could be something like energy security. Now, if there are pressures on us to in a way, shall I say, dilute our energy security because for political reasons, we have to have the courage to stand up.
That's right.
So, for me, what happened last year, I mean, I had very clear mandate from Prime Minister that the interests of the nation's energy security and the interests of the Indian consumer, they should be the
benchmark for successful foreign policy. So, you have said also, you have written that our foreign policy is development centric, and this is linked to what you are just saying, and you have written that we have done things with foreign countries in a way which actually generates employment for our youth, which creates wealth for our country, which helps India become a prosperous and a developed country, which is the mission given by Prime Minister for next 25 years. So, on this front, the linkage between economics and foreign policy, I think Modi government has done it a lot better than predecessors and shown the linkages, be it the fuel prices at the pump that you spoke about, be it food or fertilizer, I mean all kinds of things where our diplomacy seems to be geared towards protecting the interests of India's average people. And in that sense, our diplomacy is more popular. You often see the opinion polls about Modi government's performance on various indicators, and always the foreign policy performance gets the highest 80% or 90%. So, and that's credit to your leadership as well. But what is it that, how have we been done this development connect into our foreign policies?
When I meet people in the country, when I travel around, one of the points I make to them is, look, don't think of foreign policy as something far away, dealing with distant places. This is a foreign policy for you. It affects you personally. Let us say petrol prices or fertilizer prices impacts your pocket. Okay. The smartphone made in India has a direct impact on you. Your ability to travel, which during COVID was made possible by vaccination, has a direct impact on you. I would say when you speak about development, one part of it is, as I said, food security, energy security, fertilizer, that's one part of it. One part of it is that foreign policy today is very geared to promoting exports, and you can see it today, there is a pickup
750 billion
there's a pickup
exports,
in our exports, and this is effort led by our Commerce Minister, but again every embassy, everybody backs it up. In fact, it's a very interesting when we spoke about the Modi style of working. When we Prime Minister felt we should scale up our targets. This is very typical Modi. He had every ambassador on the screen. He himself came for the meeting. He had Minister Piyush Goyal sort of set out the issues. So every ambassador felt that there was an expectation directly voiced by the Prime Minister saying, go out there, get that trade target done. Okay. That gives you a very different result. And typically in our history, Prime Ministers don't do this. Okay. Prime Ministers do not have ambassadors and say, this is your target, now you tell me quickly how are you going to achieve it.
So, talking of targets, I mean, one of the things you have mentioned about Prime Minister Modi is he has asked you all to think not just about next 5 years or next 10 years, but 25 years, which of course is the Amrit Kal target. Where does that long-term strategy come in? I mean, India, people used to call it a messy democracy. People are worried about getting re-elected every 4 or 5 years. Where do they have the bandwidth to think big about 25 years? Look, where does the audacity to think about 2047 come to a generation of policymakers who are probably not going to be there to see that themselves, but are doing it? And you have mentioned that we are laying the foundation for a global footprint. Foundation, these 9 years, 2014 to 2023, seems like you have been laying the foundation for something far more glorious and greater. So where does that futuristic and long-term thinking come from?
When Mr. Modi was Chief Minister of Gujarat, one of the approaches that he brought to bear at that time, and this is something I've learned from others, I did not have the experience of working with him then, was don't think of this term only. Think, don't do something because it's going to happen in this term. Think beyond this term. Okay. Now, that's at a state level. I think when you are now talking of the most populous country in the world, our challenge has always been think short and think small. How do we get beyond this? Now, a lot of things which he is laying the groundwork for, we may not see the results today or tomorrow, because they are in many ways very fundamental changes which will shape the long-term trends. If you look, for example, at the gender issue, okay, it can be something as a beginning like toilets. It can then be education, then it can become opportunity, it can lead to demographic improvements, it will lead to confidence in workplace. But what will it eventually do? It will actually bring about a fundamental change in the position of women in our society and their contribution to national development.
Yep.
Okay. It's not going to happen in 5 years or even 9 years or maybe even 15 years. It's a trend. But somewhere, see, if you don't start a trend, what happens? If I were to say everything which I do must show results in 5 years, I'll only do the small things. So you think of an era when you have the audacity to dream big.
And the leading power goal, sir, is that
yes,
exactly that, isn't it? A developed country in terms of economic terms and geopolitically a leading power in the world.
A leading power is an international relations description of her aspiration. There will be other, a developed country is another description. I can, depending on which perspective you have. But my point is, if I were to relate this to your earlier question, what is the development? At the end of the day, look, any country's position in the world will be as good as its development at home. Huh?
Absolutely.
You can't have below average development at home and say, well, I'm going to have a very ambitious foreign policy. And that is really some of the problems that we encountered in the 60s and the 80s and the 90s.
The gap between the intent and the capabilities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
now we are developing the capabilities.
The two go together. So to me, when people say, if you are sort of shall I say, you take a more robust posture outside. I take a more robust posture outside because in my back the domestic situation is much
Massive
stronger.
transformation is happening. Yeah.
So, I am empowered by what is happening. And when you think, when you speak about how will development impact foreign policy, yes, exports will impact, but remember there is one big revolution on which we are at the doorstep, and that to my mind and is the revolution of the global workplace. That in a knowledge economy, what will happen is you are going to have a fundamental, you already have a fundamental mismatch between where there is production and demand and where there is talent. Now, this has to balance out in some way, and we as a country, if we can improve our talent, if we can give people the skills,
Yeah.
there is a global workplace out there waiting for them. And global workplace does not mean, by the way, that you have to go out. Global workplace means somebody, you and I could be sitting here, but we could be doing work, our employer could be in Europe or America or Japan or whatever it is. This world of an AI and this world of a much more, let us say, a semiconductor driven world, it's going to be very, very different. It's going to, you will have both mobility of people, but also mobility of tasks.
Yeah.
Actually,
and we are preparing with our
right. Again,
yeah.
see, I mean, I want you to now think backwards in 9 years. PM spoke about digital India. PM spoke about skill India. He spoke about startup India. Where was he going? He was doing building blocks.
Ahead of his time.
Correct.
I didn't hear any world leaders talking about these things 9 years ago.
Right.
About AI and about digital and all these things.
Yeah. So today, if you ask somebody, you go to some conference, okay, Munich Security Conference. You ask them saying, okay, tell me what's the big issue. They'll say tech wars. Then you roll this back and say, okay, who started thinking of preparing for the tech wars? Who started thinking? There's another, by the way, very important word you will hear today, phrase, trusted collaboration. Okay. Trusted collaboration means you and I are secure with each other, and in this world where data is so crucial, where artificial intelligence will be the key driver, trusted collaboration will be the real relationships in the world which will shape the future. And this, the digital, the skill, the talent, the startup, this is what it is about. So, we are 9 years of Modi government, but it's important, it's crucial to look ahead. Sometimes it's also good to look at the rear view mirror and say, okay, where did this start? What were the building blocks? And these are some examples.
Absolutely. So, the foundations are being laid. Talking of trusted partnerships, Dr. Jaishankar, let me draw you to the geopolitical arena. People call you actually a master of, statecraft, and you've written that Modi government has done optimal positioning of India in world politics, and I'm quoting, less by hedging and more through active pursuit of interests and values. Now, this hedging has historically been seen as the fate of middle powers because they should not choose sides, and it's rather safer to be somewhere in the middle and extract concessions from all sides. That's a pragmatic thing. But what you are saying is that we have shown more flexibility in the Modi era in terms of alignment. We are of course not into alliance with anybody, but alignments, and there has been a certain sharpness in that. A lot of people in the international relations community appreciate that India is finally acting, like you said, acting and thinking big, and is not confined to just being a swing state between two existing power centers. And on that front, you've said that, and I'm going to quote you from your book, we need to engage America, manage China, cultivate Europe, reassure Russia, and bring Japan back into play. So, what you are saying is that in this emerging multipolar order, India has got the strategy to navigate these multiple camps that are going around, and still we are determinedly, doggedly pursuing our own goal, which is to be a leading power. and if required, we also align based on geopolitical needs. And this is different from the old non-alignment dogmas and all these things. So when you say it's a bolder foreign policy, is this what you mean? And what is it with our strategic positioning that has really, you think, a big change in the Modi era compared to earlier times?
Well, in a way, your question has answered itself. Okay, look, if there are, let us say, 7, 8 competitive centers, maybe 10 competitive players. One way is to say, when I say hedging, is like, look, I'm not going to offend anybody, I'm not going to do anything which would get anybody very excited. So it's kind of a low posture, I say low risk, low gain, sometimes low relevance situation, okay, where you basically say, this is not my problem, leave me out of this. Okay,
I just survive and exist.
This is one way of dealing with it. The other way is to say, I will, this issue, working with this country will get me that benefit. So yes, I'll take that call. Okay, I will then deal with other countries on other issues, sometimes harmoniously, sometimes okay, you may not like it, but guys, you got to live with it. So that is another way of dealing with it. So if I were to say, let me give you an example. Okay, we had actually for the last 20 years a steadily emerging situation in the Indo-Pacific. Okay. In the Indo-Pacific, you could see the fundamental balances were changing, the economies were changing, the political weight was changing, the strategic situation was changing, the global commons was changing. Okay. Now, one way is to say, well, let me walk this very carefully without offending anybody, doing anything, a kind of do no harm kind of principle. The problem with the do no harm is you also do no good at times.
And you stagnate at a certain position as a middle or a small power.
So what happens? No, not just stagnate. You sometimes actually, there may be some important issue and you are not there, you are missing.
Excluded from.
And no, your own interests are not served because you are not there.
Right.
So, so what happened, if you look at the story of the Quad, in 2006-7, there was an effort, there was a thinking to do it. They actually created a Quad. Then the moment the heat went up a bit, we backed off. So did the others, but we also backed off.
Correct.
Now 10 years later, fast forward, okay, now it's Modi. Okay, thought it through very carefully, did not take a decision in a hurry. But once you think it through, okay, you've seen it go from 17 foreign secretary to 19 foreign minister to 21 prime minister. Okay, you've seen the Quad expand, the range of its activities grow, it's deepened, and today it is there to stay, and it is a major factor.
Force for good, as a prime minister.
Yes, a force for good. Now I can give you other examples. If I were to go to the other side, and this is still kind of emerging. It's one thing for me to say, okay, you have this Abraham Accords, and maybe it will lead to a more stable West Asia. But then the other way is to say, okay, I'll actually work with these countries, and I'll help. I'll make my contribution. Maybe I'll get some benefit also out of it. So we actually took the decision to create the I2U2. So I point this to you that if I were to take it from diplomatic mechanisms to something like, say, a key economic issue today, which is supply chains and trusted collaboration. I think it's very clear to us, to me at least, and to the government, who our natural technology partners are. Our natural technology partners are those who will treat data with the kind of privacy and the security and the practices which we ourselves would.
That's right. Okay.
So now it cannot be that you hedge on every issue compulsively as a kind of a foreign policy. That's a lazy posture to my mind. That means you haven't thought through the issue. You're not prepared to actually do a cost benefit analysis. I think there are times, I am not saying we need to align on every issue and I stick my neck into every problem in the world. I will be picky about it. I will make my calculations, but if I find my interests are at play, if I find there is gain to be had, increasingly I am not a nation who should be sitting on my hands and watching the world go by.
Absolutely. Dr. Jaishankar, talking of proactive diplomacy, many have sought that India should play a bigger role in global peacemaking also. And Prime Minister, when he met leaders of both Russia and Ukraine, he has conveyed that we will do everything possible to try and bring this conflict to a close. And likewise, we have many other crisis zones around the world. And there was an era, if you recall, way back before you entered the foreign service, from the history books, when Pandit Nehru was there, and he used to offer these peacemaking efforts in Korea, in the Suez War of 1956 and so on. So do you think we are now at a position where we can also foray into those sorts of peacemaking ventures that could potentially elevate our soft power even more in the diplomatic arena?
At the moment, it's very hard to give you a kind of a sweeping yes or no answer. I think we are in a position today to influence many domains, many issues, many problems. Okay, they may not be that necessarily old-fashioned interstate conflicts. Yeah. Okay, so let us say we did this Voice of the Global South Summit. We did it. And 125 countries participated in it. Now, we did it because we wanted to tell the South, saying, look, we have the G20 presidency. We take it as a very serious responsibility. We want to find out from you directly what are your concerns, and we'd like to bring it into the discussion. So we will try to be your voice. Now, you are trying to deal with a very serious issue in a very helpful, contributory way. When it comes to actual conflicts between nations, at the moment, obviously, there is one big one. It is one where, as you say, Prime Minister has spoken to both the presidents. He also met President Zelensky in Hiroshima. My own sense is people do see us as helpful, as a country which has its lines, but every conflict has to have a certain it arrives at a point where countries are open to some kind of resolution.
Like a ripe moment,
resolution. At the moment, more of the problems are smaller issues, the grain corridor, the nuclear issue, the prisoner of war exchanges, etc. Some of these we've been working with other countries, but I would say these are still probably very early days on the Russia-Ukraine if you're looking at conflict resolution.
Dr. Jaishankar, we cannot have a TV show on Indian diplomacy with you without talking about the diaspora. I mean, that has been probably in many ways unprecedented in the history of independent India, the kind of effort and energy and mobilization that Prime Minister Modi and the entire government has done for the diaspora, the kind of work, the reforms, the policy changes. Now, that is probably a priceless asset that you have actually cultivated, and we can clearly say, I think with confidence, that India is stronger on the world stage because our diaspora is so energized and so electrified. And so your thoughts on why PM is such a big hit with the diaspora, and what is it that he has told you all to do for the diaspora, that they love India, Mother India back so much, and today it's like we have 32 million additional force multipliers all across the world over and above the 1.4 billion Indians.
When Prime Minister Modi assumed office as Prime Minister, this was May, it was 9 years ago. I remember coming a few days later, I was ambassador in the US in June, early June, and had a fairly long conversation with him on diaspora. and that conversation led to eventually what became the Madison Square Garden event.
Yeah.
Okay. You've seen that now sort of reincarnate and sort of become
A phenomenon,
a phenomenon. Australia was the most recent one. What is the difference earlier and now? One, I think Narendra Modi gives a degree of respect to the diaspora for their contributions to India, which was long awaited. You know, this is a community, and this could be nationals, our nationals, nationals of other countries. But if you look at the last many decades, you know, the diaspora actually stood by this country in times of trouble. But they always felt that solidarity, that contribution was not given that kind of recognition, and I think that is something Prime Minister Modi has done. That's number one. Number two, I think he also realized, and I attribute this, I discovered this over a period of time. You know, he is actually a surprisingly well-traveled person. In fact, in 2014, most people in Delhi did not have that understanding of him, and neither, I would say in all honesty, did I. It's only in the last 9 years traveling with him I had realized, you know, where did he go at what point of time, and he's in his pre-government years, he's traveled a lot. Now, I think his takeaway from that was that it's actually the diaspora achievements which are building the image of India. That when people abroad think of India, they don't necessarily think of a nation, they think of a person. You know, it's their doctor, it's their lawyer, it's their chartered accountant, it's their teacher. That is what they associate with India. So when you actually give respect to the people who are shaping the image of India, that is something which is very well deserved, and by the way, it strengthens those people in that society. And the third is, I think perhaps more than almost any other political leader that I know, I think he intuitively grasped globalization. And he understood that, look, we are moving into an era where people will move up and down. You know, somebody who's gone to America is not gone forever. They will also come back. You know, there will be businesses which will move up and down. There will be talent, there will be education. You know, this whole idea of what is called the living bridge.
What goes around comes around.
Yeah, and so that's why I said this. Even the understanding of a global workplace.
It's
so
amazing.
He's been actually, for example, pushing for mobility agreements.
Yeah.
So we've done. I mean, look at the last few years. We've done, including in the Australia trip, we did a mobility agreement there. But there's one more thing. Look, anybody who lives in a foreign land needs the full support of their country. That support can be security support, like you're in trouble, I find, like what happened in Ukraine. It could be, in a way, welfare support. You know, you're in trouble, you don't have legal fees. So actually, Prime Minister instituted, expanded this fund called Community Welfare Fund, so that today people in trouble are taken care of. But the bit which you often neglect, people want, when India stands up for its diaspora, that diaspora is respected in that society.
Absolutely.
So, you could say the 1.4 billion Indians, they're standing together with Indians in all the other countries of the world. That Indian walks taller every day because of that.
Absolutely.
And that happens every time Prime Minister Modi goes to a country. One effect of this gathering, that picture, that sentiment, what comes out, is the Indian out there feels okay.
And it's an affirmation of civilizational India. Viewers, this enriching conversation with none other than Dr. Subrahmanyam Jaishankar has brought out so many dimensions of Indian foreign policy to all of us, and we are so grateful. We are actually inspired, like his foreign service officers. The country as a whole is inspired by 9 years of Narendra Modi's rule, and we are looking forward to many more years of Modi ji's good governance and robust and proactive foreign policy, and Dr. Jaishankar's steering of India's foreign relations. It's a great responsibility on your shoulders, sir. But the way you have been holding your own, it's very admirable. And I can tell you, a lot of young people think of you as a role model. And today we just saw, viewers, why Dr. Jaishankar is so liked and admired by so many people, not just in India but around the world, because he is able to join the dots and show you why foreign policy matters. So I hope you will all continue to support Dr. Jaishankar in his endeavors, sir. The people of India are with you, and the people of the world increasingly are with you. So thank you so much for joining us and for enlightening our audience.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure, and I really appreciate very much, the open conversation that we've had. It was a real delight.
That's all, viewers, in this special episode with Dr. Subrahmanyam Jaishankar. Do read his book. I forgot to mention at the beginning, he is not just a practitioner of diplomacy but also a scholar practitioner. India Way is a global bestseller and has been translated into so many languages, but it's still worth reading, because if you're reading his book and then watching this show, then you will be able to further understand the making of India's master strategist on foreign affairs. That's all in this episode of Indian Diplomacy. I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.